David F. Hofstatter is co-founder, board member, president, and CEO of Callwave. Prior to Callwave, Hofstatter founded the Advanced Products Group at Digital Sound Corporation, where he developed enhanced voice services business plans, voice over IP, market strategies, and advanced product trials reporting to the CEO. At Digital Sound in 1995, Hofstatter pioneered and launched the industry's first web browser-based unified voice, fax, and email messaging service for end-user market validation by telecom service providers, including GTE Verizon, SBC Pacific Bell, Qwest US West, Leap, Wireless Qualcomm, Deutsche Telekom, T-Online, and others. Previously, Hofstatter held positions in marketing, IT management, and financial planning at the ComDesign Data Communications Group of Network Equipment Technologies. Hofstatter also serves on the board of directors at Communications Services Incorporated in Phoenix, Arizona. He holds a degree in business economics from the University of California at Santa Barbara, where he is active in technology commercialization and as an advisor and guest lecturer for the College of Engineering. So I'd like to welcome Dave Hofstatter.
Thank you, Davis. You got height on me, that's for sure. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's great to see what appear to be a lot of students. You guys aren't in business suits, so I'm going to assume you're all students. I apologize for the CEO suit. That's to protect me from making public statements which the SEC would put me in jail for, so I'll try to keep my remarks safe. You know, that piece from KEYT, I really want to thank KEYT and Gabe for doing that. They really have done a fine job of sort of characterizing what Callwave is about. This really allows me to be a little bit more extemporaneous in talking about the process of going from an idea, which frankly the idea of Callwave goes back to 25 years ago when I was sitting in a room just like this with you, with students like you guys, to the IPO process. And most people might think that the innovation and creativity process really began with that entrepreneurial leap of faith 6 years ago when we founded the company. It really started, frankly, with developing conviction around a perspective on industry, the telecom industry specifically, that goes all the way back to the late 70s and early 1980s. I'm going to steal a line from my co-founder and business partner, Peter Sperling. He gave a commencement address here a couple of years ago, and he started his address by saying that, boy, if you had told me, you know, that 20 years from now, I'd be standing up here giving a speech, you know, having broken the log jam on IPOs in Santa Barbara, I would have asked you for some of what you were smoking, because it's obviously pretty good. And Peter and I definitely both share that perspective. I mean, this process of 6 years of building this company and conducting an IPO was not anything that he or I could foresee. But the fact is that I did run into Peter Sperling probably less than 100 yards from this building in a classroom 25 years ago, and this is partially in jest. You know, one of the secrets to our success is that he went on to become a billionaire, and when he came back to Santa Barbara, he had lots of money. So it was an easy early start for the company, getting angel capital from someone who shared a vision and had a deep conviction about the opportunity. Not every entrepreneur has the fortune of making best friends with a future billionaire. If you guys want to start a business, I highly recommend you do that. Look around, see which one of your friends here are going to become a future billionaire. But you know, Peter would clearly want me to point out that, all kidding aside, the contribution that he really brings to Callwave was not really the capital. In fact, we ended up raising the majority of our venture capital from people other than Peter. It was really a perspective that he and I developed over the years. We stayed good friends once we graduated, and the perspective is the thing that really was the genesis of the company. And I have a series of 4 or 5 experiences I'd like to share with you leading up to the founding of the company. And then as it relates to how we built the company and managed to take it public, which frankly is a brutal process, and I don't want to say too much about it because it'll scare you from ever wanting to do it. I'll leave to Q&A. And Shauna, you can drill in and get the questions answered with respect to what it takes to build a company and how to do a public offering. The more interesting question that I thought I should pursue for you folks is why callwave? Why this group of people, and why this company, and why this idea? What was it about the idea that allowed us to persist through all the milestones necessary to get to profitability, to get to scalability in an industry that the capital markets were excited about, and then get the thing public? So the first lesson, lesson we learned and experience I'd like to share with you all really goes back to almost exactly 25 years ago to the date. It was January of 2000, and Peter and I didn't know each other, but we were taking a class. It was an interdisciplinary class, really speaking to the early university commitment to bringing down the walls between groups here at the university. It was an econ computer science class in the economics of information technology. And the professor at the time, Dennis Maroka, had assigned a project which required that you pick a partner in the class and evaluate the development of a small business accounting system from a cost perspective. Do a full costing of what it would take to take a manual accounting system and automate it. And this is a great subject. I was interested in it. Peter was interested in it. It just turns out that I happened to pick the guy that went on to become a future billionaire, and I probably owe some friends and family stock to Dennis Maroka for assigning that, because if I hadn't picked a partner, I may never have met Peter, and this company may never have existed. But in any case, we got together to do that project, and we immediately just became fast friends and started goofing around, and didn't get much work done, frankly. I can't really say that we were lazy about it. It was just that we started thinking about industry, and what he'd been thinking about in parallel while he'd been taking a couple years of accounting and economics courses really mirrored what I had done. And there was a prerequisite to get into that class, which is you had to take Fortran programming. You probably don't even know what Fortran is. Do you guys know what Fortran is? Of course you know, I'm kidding. But we actually thought that was a cool language way back then. And so we both had this interest that hybridized, technology and economics. And what we found was this pretty deep common interest that both of us had developed independently with respect to future technology markets, and which markets would be hot and which markets wouldn't be hot. So around about the end of the assignment, we had done zero to produce this costing of an accounting system, and we found ourselves at the first Comdex show in LA in 1980. Now, the Comdex show is huge today, and this was a really small show at the time, but we went down there to sort of pursue some of our thinking and see if we could get some validation for future technology markets. And we ran across this trade show booth of our company called Ashton Tate. How many folks have heard of Ashton Tate here? Wow, well, quite a few. You guys are showing your early awareness of the PC industry. Ashton Tate, I don't know where they are today, but at the time, they were about a 20-person company that had built a software application not for a mini computer, which is what ran in the lab here at UCSB. It was a DEC-VAX installation. But it was a software that ran on a $4,000 IBM PC-DOS machine. And it was unique, and it had only been on the market for 6 months, because you could have an end-user accountant program an accounting system for the equivalent in hourly wages of a few $1,000s. And we looked at this, and we grabbed as much literature as we could. We punched 3 holes into it. We stuffed it into a binder, and we turned it in. And we said, here's our answer. And the beauty of this was that Dennis had not asked us to automate an accounting system for a 200, 300, 400 person organization. He'd said, pick any company, dream it up, fictitious business, and automate their accounting. So we asked the guys in the trade show booth, well, who really uses this to automate their accounting? Well, you can't really do it for a big business. But if you had like a small business, you could probably get away with running your accounting on this silly little PC software. And your accountant could probably write the program to do receivables, payables, journals, ledgers, and all that stuff. And we said, great, we're going to invent a small business, turn this in, and get an A. And Peter and I were used to getting A's. I should express that, not to wave my own flag, but he was a pretty bright guy and never studied and got A's. I was the guy who always studied instead of partied on the weekends and to get A's. And we turned it in, we got a C-. And that first experience was in later years really profound, because Ashton Tate went on to devastate the small business accounting systems market. People stopped buying mini computers and writing Fortran code to build their small business accounting systems, and they started using Ashton Tate. And it created a low-end revolution, if you will, driven by economics. The economics were really the thing that we got right at the time. Dennis, forgive me if you're out there, if you ever see this. Dennis's perspective on it was, no, you guys should have costed the hourly wage of a Fortran programmer and the cost of a mini computer and come up with an $80,000 answer. And what we came up with was about a $4,000 or $5,000 answer. And the difference between $4,000 or $5,000 and $80,000 was what drove that industry into existence. The lower economics of this simpler, smaller, cheaper accounting system really created an industry, created a market. And at the time, we had a sense that that was what was going to happen. Just quick closure on that first story. About 5 years later, I was out of school, working in a business, and I took my first real vacation. Went to Wailea in Maui and checked into my hotel, and they said, I'm sorry. I mean, at the time, I looked like I was 16. And I had the problem of looking really young when I was a young professional, which I finally figured out how to use to my advantage now that I'm older. But worked really well during the dot-com bubble. I mean, I had gray hairs, but everybody thought I was 20-something, you know. So, and I checked into the hotel, and they said, I'm sorry, Dave, but we gave your hotel room away. And we're going to ship you down to Kaanapali. And I said, no, I want to stay in Wailea. Just give me another room in Wailea. And they shipped me over to the beach cabanas at the Stouffer's Wailea, which is at the time like $500 a night. And I had an $80 room. And so I really scored. I mean, I got this really, really bitchin' room. I had my surfboard there, my girlfriend, looked like I was 16. All these guys running around in really, really starch-pressed polo shirts, you know, lacrosse at the time. You may not remember the brand. And me. And after a while, I realized all these guys work for Ashton Tate. They're the President's Club members that had won this trip to Hawaii at Ashton Tate. And the economics of that situation were so profound an influence on me. Because what it stated was this company that had this schlocky little PC-based accounting system solution was making so much money, and their sales team was making so much money and having so much success, that 30 of these guys and their spouses were staying in these $500 a night rooms on the Cabana Beach wing of Stouffer's Wailea. And that stayed with me. Now, this is 16 years before I founded callwave. But I went on from there to have that exact same experience 4 or 5 times. And the aspects of that experience, and I'll share just a couple more examples and try to be more brief about it, that were so influential to me were that when a technology, a new technology like a personal computer, disrupts the existing leading technology like a mainframe, a mini computer solution, there's a couple aspects to that that are really, really key. And these are the principles that we apply to callwave to start our business and succeed. The first aspect is that it's always going to appeal to the least sophisticated customer with the least amount of money to spend. And most entrepreneurs and most technologists don't really care much about that less sophisticated, lower income marketplace. But that's where some of these disruptive technologies take root. The second thing is that the leaders in the industry at the time are always in denial about the potential of the disruptive technology to come up from below, to first serve the least sophisticated customer, then get more powerful over time. How many small, medium businesses today run their accounting systems on a mini computer? They're running them on PCs. Pretty sophisticated PCs, but they're running them on PCs. So over time, what we saw, just happenstance, by coincidence, because we were pursuing an interest, Peter and I were down at this show in LA, this early ComDeck show, was discovery of an application that over 20 years, ultimately completely eliminated the market for companies like Prime Computer, HP's mini computer line, DEC, the DEC VAX computer line. Those companies had to completely abdicate that market. But at the time, I can remember having a conversation, my second story, I had a conversation with my brother in the mid-'80s, and he was doing CAD development. He was an engineer on an Apollo computer, not Apollo Group, Peter Sperling's company, but there was a computer company like SGI called Apollo, and he thought this company had the hot next thing. And I kept arguing with him. And he was an expert in that field, a little older than me, bright guy, I guess, and he was arguing with me. And I was saying, no, that application is going to run on a PC someday. And he just said, that's a joke. That'll never, ever happen. But I was pretty sure that it would. And that conviction, if you will, is the conviction of the entrepreneur who goes against the grain of the conventional wisdom, sort of the in-the-box prevailing wisdom of the time, which is personal computers are never going to destroy DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. Well, Compaq, the PC company, ended up buying Digital Equipment Corporation a few years ago. So it does happen. And without that conviction of having seen those trends, in the first case at UCSB and the next case a couple years later with Digital Equipment Corporation being consumed by a PC company, Compaq, it would have been impossible to do what we did at callwave. More importantly, it wasn't just something in my mind. This was a perspective and a conviction that was shared by the entire founding team. So when we were told in 1999 that this little piece of voice over IP software would never rise up to really amount to anything, to generate any profits, to be a viable business, we thought back to those lessons that we had learned. And we sort of had a perspective and a way of understanding those criticisms that wasn't, putting our heads in the sands and not listening, but was looking for the pattern of response from the existing thought leaders. These were people telling us the conventional wisdom was, if you're doing VoIP, you should be selling to the large enterprise. They'll be the first people to adopt voice over IP. And we kept thinking, no, this is a disruptive technology. We're going to sell to grandmothers. And we're going to use a new technology that can build a phone line over your internet connection in your PC instead of an expensive copper wire pair. And the same analogy, the exact same principles that applied to the PC disrupting the mini computer apply to voice over IP. They apply to the notion of using the internet as a platform to build phone services instead of using the traditional conventional way, which was expensive circuit switching and copper wire pairs. So without getting into the technology depth here and trying to make you guys all experts on, the ins and outs of VoIP soft switching, I've got my VP of engineering here. If you want to really get some expert opinion, he'll tell you about it. He's the guy that built the technology with a team of 40 engineers. Dave, why don't you just wave your hand? Everybody who works at callwave is named Dave, as it turns out. Without getting into that technical depth, the key thing, the learning that I wanted to impart to you all today is that the things that you're seeing and wondering about now, the trends in technology, the trends in technology management, business startups, those things and the predictions that you yourself are making about the trends that will occur in the future are the seeds of your career, are the seeds of conviction. If you have 3 things you're thinking about and one of them turns out to be right 3 or 4 years from now, proves itself in and is validated, go with that one and build conviction around the perspective that you had when you saw that coming. Now, I want to put one caveat on this, share one more story, and then go to Q&A. The caveat I want to place on this is that not all business startups, not all entrepreneurial activity follows this pattern that I've been describing. This pattern of first appealing to the least demanding, least sophisticated customer because it's based on some disruptive technology and business model. It's pretty clear that there are lots of jobs out there, there are lots of technology development opportunities that are simply making the existing technology better. What Clay Christensen, professor at Harvard, calls incremental technology. But he points out, and this is key if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you have any entrepreneurial spirit, he points out that incremental technologies, those technologies that at the time were making that DEC VAX a little bit better, or the technologies that were making the legacy phone line services a little bit better, caller ID is a good example, the next generation chip from DEC that made the mini computer faster, that's another good example. Those technologies are the domain of the incumbents in an industry, the big legacy companies. Those are the guys that capitalize on that innovation. The people who truly get and understand and can win against those big companies are the companies that pursue disruptive technology. And this is the key finishing point, or the key caveat for you. When you're dealing with a disruptive technology, whenever you talk to the leaders in the incumbent industry that you're in, they're going to think you're smoking dope. One last example of how that works. My business partner, Peter Sperling, left UCSB after the Ashton Tate experience and quite a few others, and founded with his father, University of Phoenix Apollo Group. And they created a revolution in higher education. And it's interesting to talk about that because here we are at an institution of higher education. And they applied these same principles of bringing education based upon a completely different platform into a new market of folks who couldn't afford and were not sophisticated enough to go to a university and get a 4-year degree. In other words, Peter had generated $20 billion in wealth, market capitalization of the University of Phoenix Apollo Group, applying the exact same principles that we've been describing, not in the computer industry, not even in the technology industry. What he found was an opportunity to do distance education and night school, a much lesser education if you think about it. There's no sports team, there's no fraternity, there's no library, there's no this, right? There's no research, there's no publishing. But there was a customer who could not access the 4-year university experience, whether because of income, affordability, time, the mid-career professional, and they needed education. And they focused uniquely on the needs of that lesser customer, solved it for them with dogged determination, and created a $20 billion corporation, the best performing IPO over the last 10 years. The #1 best performing IPO over the last 10 years. I can't say next 10 years. They put me in jail for that. Actually, I don't have an affiliation there, so Peter can't say that. But that's the power. That's the power of what we're describing, and that's what gets me up in the morning. When, frankly, the how of how we got done the IPO was a brutal and, frankly, terrifying experience. We've got some business people here in the audience, some professionals from the business community. You guys all know this. What does it take to actually get an IPO done? And we're segueing into the Q&A here. The answer is real straightforward. It takes about 3 dozen lawyers, and not one more than you absolutely need. Because if you have one too many, it drives you nuts, and you give up and you go home. It is a brutal process, and if you want to get through that process, you need the courage of your convictions. And if you want the courage of your convictions, you got to start developing it now. That's my message.
We'd now like to move into a Q&A session. We have, once again, a mic over here and a mic over there with Davis. And if you would ask your question into the microphone, that way we can get it on tape. And who would like to lead with the first question?
Hi, Dave. So you talk about revolutionizing the industries and stuff, like come up with something new. Everybody tells you that it's not going to work, this is not a good product, all that stuff. When do you know your turning point or something? When do you know whether you have a great idea or whether you have a great failure?
There's a little bit of that every day. Part of what you do is you shield yourself from the criticism thoughtfully. You need a lot of intellectual honesty and Socratic dialogue. You need to really take the feedback and see if there's any jewels in there. But you shield yourself from a lot of that by staying clear on your vision and reaching deep into this well of conviction that, of course, those people are going to be giving us that message. It's part of the process. You know, I just asked for $10 million of venture capital from Sequoia, and they showed me the door. Yeah, of course they're going to show me the door. Now, I know it sounds a little arrogant, but that's part of the mechanism, which is, and I'll add this to the message, most venture capitalists don't fund disruptive innovations. If you look at the history of truly disruptive innovations and ask Clay Christensen, the capital markets can't get their arms around that. And so I address your question by saying that the worst place to get that negative criticism, that feedback, is from an investor when you need their money to make payroll. Right? And that's when you really listen. And I can't tell you how many times we had a Sand Hill Road venture capitalist tell us, man, if you guys would just market to license your technology to a telephone company or market to a sophisticated guy like me that has a broadband connection at home and really high income, I'll pay $20 for your service. You know, and that's the same message that Peter and his father at Apollo Group got, which was, when are you guys going to get real and have a real degree and a real university? So there's a ton of pressure that comes, and largely you just shield yourself with a team of people who share the vision and who have deep experience that sort of expects that feedback and isn't unrealistic about it. I should finish just by saying, when you the ultimate ground spring of validation is when you get a customer and nobody thinks much of that customer, a grandmother in Illinois using your product, and they're really, really excited about it. So if you look to the customers and stay shielded within your vision, that's Socratic, it's a Socratic process that led to the vision, you can persist.
Hi, my name is Ben. Excuse me. As far as the development of new industries, where do you think voice over IP is right now, and where do you see it in the future?
I'll try to give you a short answer to that. First of all, it kind of requires a definition of what voice over IP is. So I'll start with that, and then, well, actually, what I'll do is I'll tell you that voice over IP is essentially changing the structure of the telephone industry. It's basically adopting the model of the internet, where IP as a agreed upon standard and open protocol allowed one group of companies to build high margin content and commerce services like Yahoo and eBay and Amazon, and a whole nother group of companies to build the transport infrastructure and all the equipment. And that decoupling, if you will, of these high margin, low capital intensity content companies from the transport is something that the telephone industry has never seen or even understands. And the impact of voice over IP is to say that voice is just another software app. It's content running over IP. So the impact of it is, as a technology, people will build products based upon packet switching instead of circuit switching. And that's a pretty ready interpretation of voice over IP, but the longer term, most significant impact is that it's going to decouple the type of companies that build the user interface to your phone calls and the software applications from the companies that provide the robust, reliable transport. And it'll all be based upon an agreed upon IP standard. And that'll get better over time. That IP standard today, by the way, is not good enough to provide voice over IP to enterprises, but it's good enough to service the low-end customer. And that's why it's a disruptive innovation coming up from below.
Being a small, relatively young company coming into the telecommunications industry, have you received, with the new technology, have you received some pressure from some of the larger companies, with your new technology to see some competition with the same sort of, applications with AT&T or with, other phone companies trying to develop similar things that you have with callwave?
You have a future in mutual fund portfolio management. That was a big question from the buy-side analysts and portfolio managers, which are the guys you sell to when you do the IPO. 130 meetings in 2 weeks in 15 cities. It's insane. That's why I got used to wearing a suit. And it's the same delivery every time. That's why this is so great, But thank you for that question. Let me put on, wait a minute. Of course, the existing service providers believe that they should own the high margins in these application services segments. But here's the truth. Every time they've tried to win that market, they've failed. They fail because they think it's about the product and the richness of the product. It's not. It's about the process of getting it right for the customers who need it most. Furthermore, even if they were to try it, you like this? They can partner with us, and they make more money when they partner with us to deliver it to their customers than if they try to do it themselves.
Have they partnered yet?
Yeah. So, sorry, just had to do that for fun. We didn't have that answer when we started the roadshow.
By the end.
About 3 days in, we'd blown that answer so many times that we got good at it after 3 days. But it's really a true answer. I mean, and that goes to the nature of disruptive innovation. Did DEC ever win the PC market? DEC mini computer? They tried. They thought they should. It's a computer. Yeah, we're going to own that market. They'd beat their chest a little bit, and they'd come out with the Rainbow. Nobody remembers the Rainbow. They had a PC, it was called the Rainbow. It was running their own proprietary operating system. Nobody was writing applications for it. It had a DEC chip in it, not an Intel chip. That's what the carriers are doing in this space. They're making the same mistakes DEC made. And we're standing there going, after you make those mistakes, okay, and then you see how successful we've been, 800,000 customers paying us $5 a month at a 70% gross margin, month in and month out. That's why we got the public offering done. None of these guys really understood what we were doing because it was so disruptive, but they could not deny the economics. So once the carriers see that, then they think, you know what, maybe we'll give these guys a shot. And that's how we're partnering with them. We're waiting essentially until they sort of, frankly, University of Phoenix did this. They ended up providing outsourced extension programs to public universities. And it's an important part of their business. That's what we're going to do in the carrier market.
We have a question on the other side of the room.
Dave, as you build your team and look at the model of disruptive technologies, and obviously creativity and innovation are critical parts of your engineering group, how do you as an enterprise formulate those guidelines in your hiring approaches? How do you attract those people consistently and continue on that path?
I don't do much of the hiring, so ultimately we allow some flexibility with the hiring managers to know how to do that individually within each group of the company. I can only really speak to how I've done it, and I've just recently hired a new executive officer. Largely it comes down to whether there's essentially a consistency in this executive officer role, a consistency in the experience, an alignment with the vision, or lacking that, a fresh open mind. How that would exist down within the engineering department, I will just say this, and I'll speak for you, Dave, and I suppose could share the platform with you, but I won't, is that we've done a tremendous job of hiring UCSB graduates and essentially giving them an opportunity to develop world-class engineering methods and begin to understand the relationship between the marketing and engineering functions, where within callwave, I would just offer that the engineering team is not trying to drive product direction and invent the product and choose the markets. There really is a mutual respect that goes on in the company. So when you get someone fresh out of school and they haven't learned bad habits, essentially, I've heard Dave use that they can be as productive in 3 years at callwave as guys that have 10 years of experience coming out of industry that may have worked at a telephone company and have the opportunity to earn as much as a guy who's got 10 years of experience. So sorry to give the blind plug for working at callwave, but we've seen guys come into our engineering group after 3 or 4 years, and they are extremely valuable. Don't tell anyone, don't tell them how valuable they are. So that speaks to executives, and did I get to your question?
From the movie, it shows that you have 2 services that you guys are providing. What are you guys working on now? Are you just trying to support that, or are you working on newer services? Could you explain that, please?
Sure. 100% of what we're doing right now in engineering and research and development is focused on the experience of a mass market consumer who has the following stuff, if you will. They've got a broadband connected PC in their home. They've got a legacy landline, and I would imagine a lot of you folks as students don't even have a landline. You've just got broadband and a cell phone. How many people here don't have a landline? Yeah, amazing, amazing, right? I go to a trade event, I ask a bunch of 40-year-olds that question, exact opposite response. One guy raises his hands. Everybody still has a landline. So our services exist on these existing network platforms as a software application. We're like a guy building software for a computer platform, and we've chosen to build on open source, some open source, Linux or something, as opposed to building on Windows NT. We've chosen a very specific platform to build on. And this is a little weird because how do you write software for the telephone network? How do you write software that bridges the telephone network, the cellular network, and a broadband internet connection? Well, that's what we figured out how to do. And it was a little tricky. And Dave, if I let him, he could speak to that. So what we're doing going forward is integrating a software application that runs on your personal computer, always connected via TCP/IP into our soft switch, with an ability to reach out from our centralized server to either your landline phone or your cellular phone. Now, we can't run software, client-side software, on your landline phone. I know you guys don't have any, so don't worry about that. Or your cellular phone. But what's happening in the cellular industry is that that platform that we build on is changing, and the cell phone is getting an open operating system over time. So not speaking too much out of school from a what's called full disclosure perspective with the SEC, the real direction of the company is to understand how those platforms evolve, how the broadband PC and the cell phone evolve, and move the software increasingly towards the mobile device. Now, what would that do for our customers? Let me give you an example of that. An example is when you receive a phone call and you're at your cell phone, you could, on the cell phone, rather than seeing blocked caller ID, you could see a very rich presentation of who this person is, where they are, why they want to talk to you, and actually hear them leave a voice message before you take that call. That's the nature of the technology that's being enabled going forward. Next question.
Dave, you talked a little bit about Ashton Tate and how there's you kind of showed you how their technology can come up and knock out the industry mainstays. What are you doing so that 25 years from now, someone isn't standing up here and says, oh, I got this inspiration from callwave, I wonder where they are now? Like, how do you keep the entrepreneurial spirit so you don't become...
I haven't told you the secret sauce. I'm worried about you guys. Next question. See, he's asking for the secret sauce. 25 years is a long time. And ultimately, disruptors get disruptive, and they get disrupted from below. There are a few companies out there that have done a really good job of cannibalizing themselves and disrupting themselves. And we model and watch their best practices, and we plan to do it someday. We've, at times, worried about companies. There's a company out there now, Skype, that has a free voice-over IP software application. And we charge about $4.50 for our service, and they're free. So from a price perspective, they're more affordable. I mean, free is quite a bit more affordable than $4 a month. So we just watch them carefully. You know, protecting your low-end customers is really the right strategy. And if you have to take a service that they're using for $4 a month today and reduce their price to $0 in order to keep that customer in your fold, that's the kind of thing you have to be willing to do. And that's really hard to do if you're a public company and Wall Street has expectations on your performance and so forth. But you know, if you understand the process and you have deep conviction, you go sell that to Wall Street and you tell them why it's the best thing possible for long-term value. And I spent a lot of my time doing that. In terms of what technology would come get us, I'll just speculate this. You know, Microsoft disrupted, the Microsoft OS essentially disrupted the DEC, what the heck was it? VMS is the name of their operating system. I believe that Microsoft is being disrupted today. I think there's very, very early signs that they're now making bad decisions with respect to protecting their low end. And I think it's going to come on a handheld platform. In other words, it can be even smaller than a desktop computer. It's going to be a lower power device, probably a handheld device. And they're working like hell to avoid it. But ultimately, you know, that would be a good example to watch over the years, to see what OS emerges as dominant. I'll even speculate further, because it doesn't really apply to Callwave's business, that it's going to be some OS that's running on a flash-based MP3 player. So there's my wild and woolly speculation.
Question over here.
When you had this new idea, when did you know it was time to pull the trigger and leave whatever you were doing to go pursue it? And what were the difficulties with that?
We knew as a team that it was time. By the time I pulled the trigger, I had assembled a founding team of 4 other guys and myself. Peter Sperling, David Trandle, Kurt Albershart, a UCSB alum, and myself, and Bob Dolan, another UCSB alum, although I think he never graduated. He started a company when he was like 21 or something. And all of us shared the vision deeply. And so we had 3 things in the founding team that gave us enough courage to really take the entrepreneurial leap. The first thing we had was people that shared the vision. The second thing we had was people who knew and respected and trusted each other, because we'd all worked together for years in the Santa Barbara community, which is probably a unique attribute here. It's kind of hard to stay in touch with the people you work with over 20 years, but I've been here for 20 years, so you develop that network. So that's the unique one. And then the third thing was people that basically had a vision drive that would propel them to work really hard for cheap. So it came down to sort of economics of, can we raise enough angel capital to fund at least a year to pursue this idea. And so the team and the angel capital and the commitment really came together in 1997, 1998. And then the difficulties, probably the biggest difficulty was unwinding from our existing jobs for each one of us. Bob had just recently exited from a prior startup, so he didn't have a job. So he actually had an easy time starting it. But the other four of us basically had to quit our jobs. And that really tests your mettle. I literally had to rewrite my employment agreement to make sure that in the future I wouldn't get into any theft of intellectual property issues from my then current employer in order to leave that company and start a business in an adjacent field. And that was a very clever period on both sides, trying to figure out how to do that and do it honorably. But we were able to do it. But it's tough.
I have a twofold question. First, you spent a good amount of time talking about how you rolled up the market from the low end. But I believe a lot of us, including me, we spent a lot of time this week in class with our instructor, Gary, and he was telling us quite a different model in terms of how to roll up a market, innovator, early adopters, and stuff.
Yeah, I love that model. That's a great model.
I was just wondering if you could go into detail.
It's a valid model.
One term, maybe in terms of marketing, how you target your customers, and B, low-end customers are probably quite willing to switch if somebody else comes around in terms of offering better value proposition.
Sure. So
how do you intend on keeping them? I mean, I'm sure there's competition from cell phone companies, free in-network calling, that kind of stuff.
Right. That's a great question. I mean, the traditional view of innovation is you take a product and you make it faster and better. And you go to the people who care about faster and better, which tend to be the most sophisticated users, right? I want a faster internet connection, right? Am I the guy who can't even afford a dial-up connection? Or am I the guy that's been living with dial-up forever and I can afford to pay more, so I'll double my spend from 20 to 40 bucks and get a broadband connection, right? That's the classic model of incremental innovation. And there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, there's a lot more incremental innovation going on out there than disruptive innovation. And if you go to work for a large company, you will be asked to practice and develop, if you're on the marketing side, specify and research incremental innovations. Because the very best customers of any large company in an industry tend to be the most sophisticated customers with an appetite for the faster, more functionality solution. They'll pay for it. They'll be the first to use it. They're hungry for the new technology to get some advantage in their business. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just happens to be that if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to compete against that big company who already has the sophisticated customer and go in and offer that sophisticated customer your brand instead of the one that they trust, you have two problems that you've got to address. And I've never seen them adequately addressed. The first problem you have to address is, how do you displace the existing provider? And the second problem you have to address is, once you've started the process of selling to that customer, how do you ultimately go down market from there if you find that you have to? Because the innovator's dilemma itself, which is what Clay Christensen writes about, is the problem of having served a very sophisticated customer at a high price point. It's very, very difficult to focus instead on a new market where they're going to pay less for it and not demand as sophisticated a capability. So it really is a question of where you want to be in the spectrum from incremental innovation to disruptive innovation. And both models are valid. I just happen to believe that most of the world is in the incremental innovation camp. It's something that Bill Davidow wrote about in the mid-'80s, high-tech marketing. He crystallized it. Other people had talked about it for a long time, and it really nailed it, and it works. But it doesn't work. In a lot of cases, it does not work for the new start, for the startup company. You'll find that those companies are flashes in the pan. It's not sustainable. I mean, you can, in a bubble economy, do that, get a couple of customers, and get an IPO done, but that's as far as you go. So if you're really interested in long-term, sustainable startup companies, the disruptive model is the greater opportunity. And I'll tell you, once you're riding that wave of disruptive innovation, more likely than not, every day that goes by, something's going to break in your favor. It's kind of a magic process of finding what Clay Christensen refers to as other startup companies that are willing to join your value network and collaborate with you. Like Microsoft found tens of thousands of ISVs, independent software vendors, who were willing to, in their garage, write software, raise a little money, write some software, and write to their platform. Those guys weren't jumping on the DEC VMS bandwagon. So that's another aspect of distinction between the two models.
So I was a little bit interested in, it seems like you don't have a technical background from your education. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit how you go from being in a non-technical background into having a company and really, founding a company that's pretty much seems like the keystone is technology. Right.
Yeah, neither Peter nor I have that technical background. Now, wait a minute, I can write Fortran. I have a technical background. This business, and I think the business of disruptive innovation that I've been describing to you, trades more on the ability to perceive market trends and validate unconventional wisdom along the way than knowing how to get the technology together. At least from the standpoint of the guy setting direction, you need a guy there that's a brilliant technologist. And between Bob Dolan, our founder, who could build for $1 what everybody else took $2 to build, and Dave Giannini and Colin Kelly, our CTO, we've got that talent. But in disruptive innovation, it, again, trades more on seeing the trends and designing a business model. I mean, if you guys have been taking, technology management courses, and Gary's been, talking to you about the discipline of business management and technology management, I'm sure you've heard a lot about what's called a business model. How many of you guys have sort of encountered that term? Yeah, it's obvious. In a disruptive innovation, a lot of times the technology itself is not the disruptive element. It's the business model that's the disruptive element. It's a business model that focuses on the overshot, less demanding customer. It's a business model that says it's not going to have every feature. So, muzzle the technology guy from wanting to put 5 features in when you only need 1 to have it good enough at a lower price point. So, Dave, again, it'd be interesting to, in another venue, have Dave speak to what this is like on the engineering side of the business. But these guys in engineering in this company have to take their satisfaction and their rewards from the fact that they work really hard and write code to put stuff in the field that gets adopted within 60 to 90 days. The business model turns around telecom features in 60 to 90 days. Previous company that Dave and I were both at, 6 to 9 years. Well, maybe not quite that long, but it was insane how long it took to turn lines of code and get into the field. They can't take their satisfaction from having the latest, coolest, hottest, sexiest feature, because that's the trait of an incremental innovator. So, for a lot of you guys, who I imagine most of your background is in technology and you're crossing over into business and business education, The thing that's sexy about the technology in our business is the fact that it gets so big so fast because there are so many people in the mass market that you got to keep the thing working. It's only got 1 or 2 buttons on it. It's not a highly featured service, but it's huge, and it's got to be reliable, extremely reliable. So, I mean, these guys get to build cool features, and they were really excited when we launched the to-to-transfer feature on the mobile phone, but they only get one of those about once every 2 years.
Before we close, I'd like to make a couple announcements. First, our next TMP lecture will take place in 2 weeks from today. That'll be February 10th, and that'll be here at 5:30. Our guest speaker will be Joseph Nida from Shepard Mullen, which leads me to thank our sponsors of the Winter 2005 TMP Lecture Series, Shepard Mullen, Stradley Yoka, and Riker Fowl. Please join me in thanking Dave.